So here's my conceptual model. And again, you can think about flow regime, the quantity of water in the stream and how it changes over time. Sarah spoke a little bit about stream connectivity this morning, and issues with poorly managed or engineered culverts. Paul and others talked about, if you want to think about thermal regimes in the realm of water quality, and then things like habitat. Paul and I just touched on that as well. So I'm going to focus on water quality, and it primarily as it relates to pesticides, and that kind of bleeds into this issue of the food chain or food webs or energy relationships. So my title here: anyone that's ever collected water samples from streams know you don't skim the scum off the top of the streams. Bogus slide. You get the point. We're talking about sampling water samples for pesticides. Cover three things. The insect population declines. I'm going to give that a very light treatment. Ellen Voss and Kristen Poppleton are going to speak about this in detail. So I'll give it a very light treatment. I'll touch on stream sampling, and that's kind of my world of monitoring streams. So I'll try to go too deep into that topic. And last but not least, talk about what did we find when we did this statewide survey of streams in Wisconsin as far as pesticide concentrations. So it's an issue of problems with insect declines. Trout anglers, team members, what are people that spend a lot of time in streams? You guys are kind of the eyes on, and women are the eyes on the landscape. And there's been a lot of talk over the last 15, 20 years about changes in insect hatches, either densities or occurrences or certain species dropping out of the system. So this audience is probably one of the first that recognize issues on the landscape. There's other anecdotal evidence. Back in the battle days, truck drivers put screens in the front of their pickup trucks so they would get plugged up with insects, and now that problem doesn't occur, or at least not so much. A downside in all this is that nobody's collecting data on our insects, whether it's terrestrial or aquatic. It's a different story in Europe, but in the United States, we have a dearth of information. So this paper, and you can't read it in the back, but there's a gentleman by the name of, who is this fellow? This is Orland's work. Yes, thank you. So back in 2017, they published a paper where they monitored insect populations and reserves in Germany for a number of years, and they saw very precipitous declines in insects. And that really spurred a lot of interest. It got a lot of public attention, a lot of researchers. There's frankly a fair amount of criticism of this study as far as the sampling design and data interpretation, but as often good studies do and some bad studies do, it generated a lot of interest. So since that time, there's been more studies, and each one of them show these disconcerting downward declines in insect populations, and primary data is from terrestrial species. So, why are we seeing these declines? Again, I'll give this a light treatment, but kind of usual suspects. So I spoke to a farmer-led water quality council group last Wednesday, and I was a little bit spooked about talking to that group about pesticides, but I made the point up front that, we do need pesticides, the green revolution. We have a population expanding on a planet. We need to feed the people. So again, I don't doubt for a moment some of these chemicals are needed, but when they're ill-applied or used where they're just ineffective, again, that can have really detrimental effects on our landscapes, and that includes trout streams as well. It's a big business. For those that can't see this in the back, but there's 4 major companies that sell agrochemicals, and again, to the tune of billions of dollars. Just one example here, Syngenta used to be a Swiss company. Now they're bought up by the Chinese National Chemical Company. So again, each of these companies is making billions of dollars each year on pesticides. So, the point being is, in Beijing, China, the board of directors from Syngenta are not going to wake up one morning and say, I've been reading those studies about insect declines. We should probably forget about these billions of dollars we're making on these chemicals. So unfortunately, in this country, that poses some significant problems. Again, not only the welcome their business, but they're trying to expand their market share, and they're in essence kind of creating a monopoly. And I just read last week, frankly, that these same 4 companies, they now own upwards of 50% of the seed vendors in the U.S. They're cornering the market both on the chemicals applied to the seeds and the seed distribution itself. So it's going to be a very uphill battle for us to see improved, more intelligent intelligent use of these chemicals. The EPA, frankly, I work with these folks a fair amount, and I get frustrated. I feel like they're not doing their job, but frankly, they're just outstaffed, funded by millions, if not tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. Again, anytime there's legislation proposed to change some of these laws, again, right away the lawyers, get lobbyists, they all come out of the woodwork, just armies of these different people associated with these chemical companies, and it trickles down to the crop consultants in this state that sell chemicals to the treated seeds to the local producers. So these public relation firms, we can trust these guys, right? And this is from the 1950s. Oh, I don't do that stuff anymore. So if we can't trust Chris Kringle, who can we trust? The next December 24th, if you're in bed, it's kind of late, and you hear somebody in your chimney coughing and hacking. Okay, I do this. Sorry. So back to the business at hand. So again, I'm a monitoring expert at the Wisconsin DNR. I'm going to talk about my stream survey design and then some of the results. You folks are all well aware of the upper Midwest, Driftless area, state of Wisconsin, very water-rich area of the country. We took all the perennial streams in Wisconsin, lined them up end to end, streamed them out. We could encompass planet Earth 1.7 times. So lots of water resources in Wisconsin, the rest of the Driftless area, and the upper Midwest. So how do we get our hand, or kind of wrap our brains around when we're trying to sample streams for whatever factors, whether it's habitat or water chemistry or whatever. So again, I'll take a kind of cue from this air proverb that if we do this in an intelligent manner, we can have a good assessment of the resources, no matter how broad they are. But again, for this to hold true, we need to be very intelligent in how we select our sampling sites so we don't induce bias, so we can make some meaningful extrapolations of the data that we want. So Sarah touched on road crossing, and we saw some dot maps earlier of road crossings across the landscape. This is just, for those familiar, I live in Madison. This is just west of the capital of Madison, capital of Wisconsin, in Madison. But those dots on the map show where there's state, federal, whatever roadways crossing streams. So in this little snapshot, there's a few hundred road crossings. If you look at the entire state of Wisconsin, that is upward of about 50 or 60,000, depending if you look at private roads, that sort of thing. So what I did for my sampling design was I took a GIS layer of all the stream threads or hydrography in the state and overlaid a roadway layer. And so it's intersects where there's culverts or bridges. Since I had to cover the state in a fairly quick amount of time, this really expedited the sampling effort. So among statisticians, this is known as your sampling frame. My sampling frame was these road stream intersects. And then after having this population of streams, I wanted to explore them, use some other statistical concerns about how do we chunk up the data to have a good characterization of the entire state. So it's stratified by land use and then stream size. So you folks are all painfully aware that streams have this dendritic or tree-like branching pattern, and certainly there's many more small streams and larger streams and rivers. So again, that fed into the sampling design. And you can, these data, just kind of break it down in more specific information. Then Strahler stream order, again, for those familiar or not familiar, a first order stream is a first order Strahler order. The two first orders joined together, that becomes a second, so on and so forth. The point I want to make out of all this, we just did a truly random draw of streams across the state. We'd have a ton of small streams sampled and no or little or no data on the larger system. So we had to factor that into our sampling design to make certain we kind of put more weight to some of these larger systems that are fewer in the landscape. So we at least had some data to characterize those larger streams and rivers as far as pesticides were concerned. So then we also stratified by land use. Again, the first strat, again, I just mentioned was Strahler stream order, and then we broke it down by different land use types. And you can see those listed here. For those that can't see in the back, the gray dots represent urban areas, kind of light development urban areas. So think of green spaces, golf courses, that sort of thing, where they're applying granulated pesticides. Again, the next strata here was corn and soybean production. Again, fairly heavy use of agrochemicals, and then in particular vegetable cropping is a very intensive use of pesticides on the landscape. So we see some clustering here of sites near Milwaukee and also in the central part of the state. And again, even though we use statistics to disperse the sampling effort, there's relatively few watersheds in Wisconsin that have high densities of vegetable cropping. And in the big scheme of things, there's fairly few areas in the state with high urban density as well, as far as the green space are concerned. So we had some clustering, but we kind of massage that in the statistics. So back in 2022, when we did the field sampling, I presented data on neonics at the DARE conference or symposium last year. And then in the interim, just this last August, I got data back from an EPA lab. Again, the first data set I had was just for 5 of these neonicotinoid insecticides. The second data set, an EPA lab ran the samples, and they processed each sample for 374 different pesticides or their transformation products. It was kind of frustrating. It took 2 years to get the data back for them, but they did it for free, so I could not complain getting about $160,000 of free lab work. So some frustration, but it's great to have that data set in hand. So some of the findings. One, you can quickly see here, there's not a, each of these different chemical types, whether it's herbicides, insecticides, or fungicides, they all kind of show up fairly similarly across the landscape in our streams in the state of Wisconsin. Now I'll break it down by individual chemicals themselves, and herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, and growth regulators. They're color-coded in my list of compounds found across the state of Wisconsin. So in the statewide survey, 135 different pesticides were found in Wisconsin streams, 135. And again, you can see the breakdown between insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides. And again, this is, as you can read here, it's an order of decreasing occurrence. So acetochlor, allichlor, metolachlor, they had the distinction of being found in every stream side example in the state. And that includes the forested north. These are broadleaf herbicides. So, their applications in some of these areas are unnecessary, certainly. So it suspects there's atmospheric transport of many of these chemicals across the landscape. Again, again, vast numbers of chemicals, and some found extremely routinely across the landscape. These areas show various pesticide compounds that the U.S. Geological Survey, because of their toxicity, have identified as chemicals of concern. And again, those 2 fat arrows point to the neonicotinoids that I think have gathered a fair amount of attention within Trout Unlimited and other water resource advocate groups across the U.S. for that matter. Just quickly, just drilling down into this neonic data, just as one example. So again, these different strata, the urban vegetable cropping, row cropping, and then kind of the other watersheds that did not include these different types of land uses to any great extent. So you can see here, it jumps out that vegetable cropping areas have extremely high concentrations of pesticides, and the concentrations are such that I used some data by Christy Morrissey and others. She did compile a study of certainly 24 different laboratory studies of toxicity of pesticides or neonics, in this case, to aquatic insects. And she concluded that the concentrations between 35 and 199 parts per trillion, that's thought to be chronically toxic to aquatic insects. That is, that they start seeing changes in behavior or growth or metabolism, but it doesn't kill them outright. And then this other threshold of 200 is thought to be acutely toxic to the aquatic life in our streams. So just showing you just kind of distribution across the state as far as numbers of pesticides are going, jumping from the neonics to the overall numbers of pesticides found in Wisconsin streams and rivers in 2022. So just briefly, some of the findings there. Again, pesticides were detected at all the sites we sampled. Again, even the forested north with little or no agriculture or perhaps lawn treatments going on, that sort of thing. Again, a mix of fungicides, insecticides, herbicides. Again, the number of compounds at any one site range from a minimum of 9 different pesticides found in a stream or river to upwards of 89. So again, just a phenomenal number of different chemicals found in our individual stream sites. And the median number here was 21 in each stream. So across the state, not an average, but at median, there's several dozen different pesticides found routinely in our streams. Minor point, there's a little hiccup at the lab, so the data for Milwaukee is a little bit suspect, but as far as the driftless is concerned, it's kind of a non-issue. And then now looking at concentrations of pesticides in the streams and some of those findings, again, you can see many of those bars, and the higher the bar, the higher the concentration of pesticides in the streams. Many of those bars are off scale. You can see the ranges that we're finding in parts per trillion of these pesticides, roughly from 9 to 2,400. A few outliers. Again, on average, you saw a concentration of 98 parts per trillion total pesticides in our streams and rivers in 2022. But if I show the true range of those values on the so what the hell's going on in the Central Sands? Well, it's a heavy vegetable cropping area of the state, and there's other factors that might be in play here. Some of the usual suspects are that they're applying very heavily, but there's also an issue that those soils that have low clay or organic content, so they don't bind with the pesticides as well. It's a shallow water table. So what are some of those factors that might be going on? Just to throw a little statistical voodoo at you folks. We took what's called a random forest model, and you can take hundreds of different predictive variables, candidate variables, and plug it into the model, and it'll actually spit out what are the drivers thought to be most important. What the model concluded, frankly, it was either agricultural land use or the absence of agricultural land use was the big decider as far as why we're seeing the concentrations of pesticides everywhere. So it's what we're doing on the landscape. So back to this, again, based on this is for neonic data, I've made some estimates of the number of streams in Wisconsin that are impacted by these concentrations of neonics. And I need to do the same thing with these other chemicals. Just quickly, I apologize for going on here, but here's my friend, the net spinning caddisfly. They're in the family Hydrocycidae. These are the streams I'm familiar with in the Driftless area. These little guys make up about 30% of the insect biomass. So they're about this big. They got a Latin name about this big. Who cares about these crummy little caddisflies? Well, they're base of the food chain. If we lose a third of that insect biomass, say goodbye to 30% of the sculpin biomass, 30% of the trout biomass, kingfishers, so on and so forth, up the food chain. So with that, again, those chemicals are having what I believe to be significant impacts on our food webs in our streams, and we need to get a handle on these chemical uses and be more vocal about improved control of these chemicals. So quickly, some next steps. I think I'll just blow through these because I'm short on time, but that's kind of my to-do list for the next year or so. But so I'll conclude at this slide, and if folks have any questions, I'll try to answer them with the negative minute and a half left.
Presentation seems like really important work. Is there any preliminary write-up or someplace where we can have some written documentation to go back and look at these results that you have found so far, or is that the next steps plan?
Right, you need to contact Tim Aspen, my supervisor, and have him light a fire under my butt. By this spring, I'll have at least something I can share with this group as far as some summary of the problems and some preliminary findings. But yeah, I need to get cracking on this, frankly.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks.
Doug?
So,
Don't make it a hard one.
well, I mean, so a lot of these pesticides, right, depending on hydrology flow regime, sometimes get a lot of spring or elusive, sometimes the spikes, whatever. I'm assuming these were all at base flow samples.
Right. And what I didn't show is I collected a bunch of data from a trout stream west of Madison called Blackbird Creek, and did repeated sampling over the summer. And I saw it between 10 and 30, actually 3 and 10-fold increase in pesticide concentrations during storm events. So yeah, flow regime is a big deal. Thank you.